differently, it seems miraculous to me. It's like there's this genetic, there's this built-in genetic, what's the word? It's like a proficiency for arranging words, and everybody will do so differently. And I think my job is to help them find that inside themselves. Which way will you arrange your paragraphs and your sentences?
There's just limitless combinations what you can do.
Yeah, limitless.
Like fingerprints.
Yeah,
each one can be different.
And it's magical. And everybody has their own worldview, and it's whether or not you're spending enough time with words to try to get as close to that bone as you can, and avoid cliches and avoid the patterns you've seen so many times before.
This brings one thing to mind. I come from the South, and the South is really known culturally for storytelling. And people sit around on Sundays and tell stories. I think it's one of the reasons a lot of great literary people were Southerners.
And are Southerners.
And are Southerners to this day. Also, I would assume from your talents and all that you also come from a background and environment where storytelling was important. And storytelling have a lot to do as you grow up to help one become a writer.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And a lot of that's probably built in and unconscious in your experience, and you're not quite sure. But, my dad was always telling us stories about work at the dinner table and being surrounded by books. My family is a reading family. We had bookshelves, and it's still almost a library for me. When I go, I steal books from my parents still, And they're like, "Where is that?" I'm like, "Oh, we have it in Idaho now." So, being surrounded by reading and storytelling, for sure, I think it made it easier for me to become a writer. But I have friends whose parents didn't read, and it's almost a resistance, to try to become a writer out of a non-literary household, and I think
that can happen too.
Yeah, of course.
Virginia.
Tony, I want to know if you work on more than one thing at a time. I know you're working on a novel right now, but that you have all these ideas in your head, and so do you have little snippets here and there, like on your computer you've got a story started and so on and so forth?
Yes, yeah. Often that's a form of procrastination because it's easier maybe to go work on something to gut through and continue through with the novel. This novel I'm working on is set during World War II, and I continually run into the hurdles of those details, those authenticating details that we're talking about. If you're writing in 2007, you can take for granted that there might be a cell phone and, that what a bra would look like or how a cook stove would work. But, I keep running into this stuff in the 40s. You're like, okay, it's 1939, and I have a blind girl, and, what social programs would there be in place for her? And, what is in her dresser when she goes to her dresser drawer? And, you can't take those things for granted. So then I fall back into hours of Googling old Sears catalogs or something, looking for things. So often I get stuck and we'll go to another project, sure. And, I write columns for the Boston Globe, so that's something I'm working on in the background a lot, too. And maybe 1 week out of every 5 I'm going and working on that. And occasionally a magazine asks me to write something, and then you do that sometimes for money, but, that's also a project you're working on. So, yeah, keeping balls in the air, much as you two do also, you're always trying to keep certain balls in the air, but there's that big ball of the novel, and you don't want to neglect it. And what I tell students is keep it on life support, even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes a day. It's like this big lake that freezes over. And if you leave it, even for Christmas break, sometimes you start to dread the holidays because it's wonderful to take a week off, but when you go back to your work, you can barely remember it. And you have to hack through all that ice to make it wet again. Or maybe the metaphor's paint, the paint dries. If it's a big, big canvas, to try to keep the paint wet in all the corners, you need to be working on it every day, just getting your mind around it a little bit in every day. I think that's true for screenwriters, and everybody's working on larger projects, playwrights, especially novelists. Those big projects, they get above 30 or 40,000 words. To leave them for a while is dangerous because they quickly lock up and they don't seem fresh or new to you anymore. They seem like somebody else wrote them.
Tell a little bit more about your Boston Globe column weekly.
Sure, yeah. I review science books. I write the On Science column for the Boston Globe, and it's wonderful science for the layperson, so I just try to address with a normal person to understand this book, and is it good? And I'm so young that I don't write bad reviews. I get sent a lot of science books, and if I don't like it after 30 or 40 pages, I'll move on because I feel like it takes so much work to write a book that it's not my place to trash it. I think the newspaper editors occasionally like bad reviews because they kind of sell newspapers. I think there is this kind of schadenfreude of reading a bad book review, but I'm not part of that. I don't like to be part of that. I don't want to be involved in bad book reviews. So I just try to find books that maybe folks aren't necessarily finding first off. and it keeps me reading about all these amazing, interesting things that are going on in the world. So,
do they send the books to you, or do you?
Often the Globe sends me a stack of galleys, the advanced reader's copies that you get before a book comes out. Sometimes I will write to the publisher, or have the Globe write to a publisher if I'm interested in the book before it comes out. And that newspaper is really good about running reviews of smaller presses or university presses. And, it's harder and harder for all books to find attention in the media right now, but particularly from smaller presses and non-New York houses who are also struggling to get attention in the media. And the Internet's another wonderful thing in book reviewing that is opening up this kind of cult of amateurism where a lot of people can comment on books. I think that's terrific. There's also a place where in a newspaper it still has a little bit more maybe authority, and I think it's really nice when a book that isn't getting a lot of attention can get recognized. So I try to look for the books that aren't the biggest, the Bill Bryson or the the big seller Oliver Sacks, who both terrific writers, but maybe people will be buying those books already, so I try to look for lesser-known authors.
What has been your own experience with reviewers, if I may turn the tables a little bit on you? How do you respond to reviewers or pay attention to them?
I'd love to be able to say, I don't read reviews, and I've heard Toni Morrison say that. Maybe she doesn't, maybe there are these special people that just don't care, but I care, and I wish I didn't, The publicist will often send a stack, or now a lot of it's over the internet, she just emails you, and you can't help but open it, because it's all about this book, and you want to understand how the world's receiving it. Writing is this lonely thing, and then your book goes off into the world, and it's not as if there's an audience. It's not like a playwright where you hear the applause or not, the lack of applause. So, yeah, I read the reviews, and, I've been very lucky that so far, in most cases, I've never really been trashed. But, my second book, my first book got such a nice review in the New York Times, and my second book had this, maybe a 80% positive review, but it's those lines that aren't nice that stay with you,
Just like teachers who get evaluated by students, we know the same thing.
99 positive and 1 negative.
Yes, that's the one you dwell on.
You really have Virginia's built a bridge for my question, and that is talking for a moment about young, upcoming writers. And I have interviewed some people on this program that they were very insistent and succeeded, but they had many publishers say no.
Sure.
So what advice do you have to young writers that oftentimes they will be turned down at the beginning? So what should they do?
Persist. I think it's important to remember, as now I've gotten to know more editors and agents as people, remember they have often an enormous quantity of submissions coming in. Most New York publishing houses won't even read manuscripts that come over the transom, it's called, like we'll flop into the boat from the ocean of writers. So agents are used as a screen, as almost like an internship, to screen all the manuscripts coming in. And they have bad days, they get tired, and it's not necessarily always the quality of your work. Maybe they've just read 9 manuscripts before yours and are exhausted. Or maybe you've got 3 typos in your first page, and you're undermining your own chances to begin with. So I think trying to remember the realities of the world of the person who's reading your work will help you a lot. And just remember that every writer you've heard of was a self-promoter to some degree, or they had somebody else around them self-promoting. And that's true of probably every musician, every architect, and to some degree, the people whose work you admire in any of the arts, there was no fairy godmother who showed up at their door one day and waved the wand and said, "You're a genius, and I've discovered you, and I'm going to find these manuscripts in this drawer and mail them out for you." At some point, they all made demo tapes, or, Allen Ginsberg running off dittos of Howell, somebody, whether or not it was the artist themselves, him or herself, was promoting, was getting that work out.
There have been some very successful books that were turned down at the beginning, but then some publishers said they recognize it, and the book is a great. It's like movies. Sometimes the critics in movies don't like something, but the public loves it.
Yeah, and that should be heartening. I think. I hope so, to people who are getting rejections. I mean, that said, if you get 20 rejections, it doesn't mean you shouldn't re-examine your work and look at it. And remember that the joy of writing, unlike speaking, is that it can always be revised. It can always be taken back and changed, and that's a wonderful thing.
Virginia.
Well, speaking of sort of future writers, do you have peers that you read and would recommend to our viewers?
Sure, of course. You mean like folks under 40 years old? Say,
Yeah,
or?
something like that. Up-and-coming
Yeah.
writers that we might not know about.
Sure. There's a book called And Then We Came to the End by Joshua Ferris that I read. I think he's only about 35. I read it this spring. It's about the corporate culture. He worked in this advertising firm, and it's told in the collective first-person narration. So it's we narrate everything. We go to the coffee shop. We do. And it's all told inside this mess of cubicles and that language that's in corporate culture now, you know, all the acronyms. It's wonderful. It's funny. It's laugh out loud funny in places and heartbreaking. It's a really nice book. Gary Schenger, who wrote a book called Absurdistan that got some attention last year, and also the Russian Debutante's Handbook. He's a young writer. I think he's under 40. Terrific. Also pretty humorous writer, but very skilled with language and a great stylist. You know, you read it almost just to see how he's using words as much as anything else. There's a writer in Los Angeles named Miley Malloy, M-A-I-L-E-M-E-L-O-Y. She's written 3 books now. She's definitely under 40. She's terrific. Just heartbreaking stories. Stories, first and foremost, you know, that you get engrossed in and move forward. She's had some stories in the New Yorker, and I think, you know, in our little literary world, it's a pretty big deal.
On that note, I bring the program to conclusion. Anthony Dorr, it's been an incredible pleasure having you here for 2 weeks. You're just great to interview, and congratulations on all your awards for your books. And ladies and gentlemen, our guest has written 3 wonderful books, one called The Shell Collector, another one is called About Grace, and the third book is 4 Seasons in Rome. We highly recommend those books to you, and I believe they've put up his website at some point during our program. But I'll let you real quickly tell them what that is if they'd like to check.
Oh, sure. It's www.anthonydorr.com. D-O-E-R-R is my last name.
I'm sure that they'll check this out. And ladies and gentlemen, we've enjoyed this so much, and we know you have too. And I'd invite you to be with us again next week at the same time. We'll move to another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.